The Kremlin says any Western troops in Ukraine would be considered legitimate targets, once again rejecting any notion of security guarantees for Ukraine. Take a listen to President Vladimir Putin, who just spoke in the last couple of hours.
Regarding the possible deployment of military troops in Ukraine, that was one of the root causes of Ukraine's desire to join NATO. So should there be any troops deployed in Ukraine, especially now, in the course of the military action, we would treat them as legitimate targets.
There you have it. It comes after a meeting on Thursday in Paris, where more than 24 countries pledged to join a force to deploy inside Ukraine after any eventual peace deal. The extent of involvement from the US remains unclear. Here's hoping that Foreign Affairs editor Philip Turle can shed some light on it for us. So, first of all, who's taking part in this coalition?
Okay, I'll come back to what Putin's been saying in just a moment. But first of all, yes, there has been some progress as far as the coalition of the willing is concerned. Up until yesterday, we know that there are about 30 countries involved, and 2, France and Britain, had pledged troops on the ground. Now, we know, according to what the French President Emmanuel Macron was saying yesterday, that 35 countries are involved. 26 of those countries have pledged troops on the ground, in the air and at sea. So we're getting a bit more information coming through. This is military chiefs who've been meeting over the last couple of days, have come up with a document outlining what they're going to do once a ceasefire deal has been signed with the Russians, and how all of this is going to be rolled out once that is over. This is a 2-point action plan, in fact. The first one is that there is something they can do immediately, and that is the Ukrainian army will continue to receive a maximum amount of military support from coalition partners, and there will be new sanctions against the Russians. 19th sanction package from the EU. Still a question being raised about just what sanctions the US could impose. And then a second action plan after the ceasefire, which is the rollout of peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine. Of course, something we've just been hearing about from President Putin, saying he's against that. So what we know is that there are 26 countries involved that are ready to send those troops. We don't know whether that will be including Germany, which is dependent on what the US is going to do. Poland says it won't be sending troops because it needs them to protect its own borders in the event of Russian aggression against Poland. And the other one is Italy. Italy says it won't be sending troops, but it's willing to help to train Ukrainian forces, if necessary, in Italy. So that's the way things stand at the moment after that meeting yesterday, but not that much information, basically because what the French president has been saying is that the more information we give out, the more that's going to go into the hands of Vladimir Putin, the more he can prepare himself to fight back against what we are doing. That's why we're being very, very reluctant to hand over many more details about what this coalition of the willing is going to try to achieve and when that is all going to take place.
And obviously a lot of it taking place after a supposed ceasefire deal, which it appears Russia doesn't want. And from what we've been hearing this morning, they certainly don't want any Western peacekeepers on the ground.
Well, it's not really a surprise, Peter. I mean, the surprise would be Vladimir Putin saying anything of the opposite. This is all taking part of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, which is where we've seen President Putin talking just now. So he says basically any Western force in Ukraine will be a legitimate target for Russian forces. But he says he doesn't think that deployment would be necessary in the event of a ceasefire deal or an agreement with the Ukrainians to move forward. Membership of NATO is also unacceptable, completely unacceptable for Russia. He said that it is a legitimate right for Ukraine to want to join the European Union, however. But the other element here, which also sheds light on the fact that Russia's not really that willing to move forward with any kind of peace talks right now, is the fact that Vladimir Putin's been saying, come to Moscow, Russia is the right place to do this peace agreement. That is something that's totally unacceptable for the Ukrainians. They will not be going to Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin to talk about a peace agreement there. So it looks like there's no movement at all from the Russians. They're just sticking to their guns about what they want, i.e. to keep hold of 4 provinces in eastern Ukraine, keep hold of Crimea, and to refuse NATO membership for Ukraine.
Now, we've mentioned uncertainties surrounding the US's involvement. President Emmanuel Macron predicting that the US's stance even in the coalition could become clearer in the coming days, but nobody should second guess what Donald Trump should do, even the French president, right?
Well, again, there's been some positive outcome from these talks. Emmanuel Macron yesterday saying that the US had given a firm yes to support the coalition. I think you have to take that in inverted commas, that yes. That means via air support, continued information and intelligence gathering, increased US sanctions, probably, and the training of military personnel. What we do know is that Donald Trump is refusing boots on the ground in Ukraine, so that's definitely a no-go for the Americans. He's been putting pressure on European countries to stop buying Russian oil, notably on Slovakia and Hungary. But there's no mention of him putting any pressure on China, which is the biggest purchaser of Russian oil, to stop doing that. They buy 2 million barrels of Russian oil a day, which is imported into China. No mention of them getting any sanctions, although there have been sanctions placed by the US on India. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen until Donald Trump comes forward with some kind of plan. We think that the Americans, or they think the Americans, are on board. One final point, which has been raised, is that Putin could agree to meet with Zelensky as a way of playing Donald Trump along to increase his own time span to continue invading Ukraine in the hopes of recuperating more land. That is something that's also a possibility. We'll have to see where all of this plays out. A lot of unanswered questions, Peter.
That would be an